Okay, and we are live.
Hi.
Can you hear me? You can
I
hear
can
me.
hear you.
Good.
I can hear you. Absolutely. So 70% of women executives will experience at least one imposter effect in their lifetime. Just listening to that statement, you would think not too much about it. But what if I were to tell you that out of that 72%, that 75%, 2/3 will go on to have relatively successful lives and 1/3 of them won't. So we're assuming by that statement that women are unstoppable and that they have equal parity because, hey, imposter syndrome is one of those things. But if we look at the stats, that isn't the case. The stats show that women are, even though they're more powerful, more successful, more conscious, they're not living to their fullest potential. They are actually feeling much more powerless, much more hopeless in order to be able to create what they want. And we have to ask ourselves why. Why is that? Why is there such a difference between why women suffer with imposter syndrome and why we don't have this huge amount of potential out there fulfilling itself? And, you know, this is some of the questions that I've been thinking about a lot, particularly because I have suffered with imposter syndrome and realizing that maybe I hadn't fulfilled my potential from what I thought I would be as a child to now. And that was one of the biggest things that I started, was probably one of my biggest pains, but also my biggest and greatest learning, because every learning that we do is here for us, isn't it, to grow and expand and to become something more. But what would it be like if we were in a world where women were unstoppable?
It would be incredible. I was just thinking about myself and something you said about not reaching your full potential. And it's only recently that I've realized that I have control. I'm not sure I like the word control, but I can make a decision as to my own potential, which I've only recently discovered. I don't know why it's taken me so long, but I think if you're, I think what happened was I started to become more and more conscious about what I was thinking, what I was feeling. And then I realized that I was nowhere near my full potential. And then I was like, am I ever really going to reach my full potential? Because there are so many, I don't suffer, I'm lucky, I don't suffer with imposter syndrome, but I suffer with a lot of other things that impact on my self-esteem and self-worth. Well, am I ever going to be able to reach my full potential? Because there's so many layers. There's just so many layers to go through.
Yeah. And that in itself creates a sense of, you know, when we say, I haven't reached my potential, we're making a judgment there, right? Yeah. We're also making a judgment. And I think, you know, I think at its basic simplicity, something that's so core is why are we here? It's not necessarily about being here so that we become the best doctor, the best nurse, the best whatever. We're here to become our best self for ourselves. We're here to be our essence, who we are, right? Not what we do. And what happens is, I think when people start to connect with their potentials, they kind of go, oh my God, I haven't reached my potential. And they're seeing this lack, aren't they? And I know you've spoken about lack before in many ways. And it's this, we're looking at ourselves in lack, and all of a sudden that then makes us feel bad. It makes us feel awful. It traumatizes us on some level because we're disconnected and our full self of who we are is not being acknowledged anymore. And so that then brings up so many things. And I suppose that just takes me straight into the idea of self-esteem, because we're talking about self-esteem and how trauma affects self-esteem. And you know, for me, when I was thinking about that, and particularly now when we talked about potential, you know, self-esteem is really something that we're evaluating. So for us, we might say, we know that from research, self-esteem, if you have higher levels of self-esteem, you're going to be happier, more successful, you'll have more friends, you will in general you'll be raised in elevation in life, right? So you'll be healthier. You'll have all sorts of things at your play. But if your self-esteem is low, then what happens is that we know that this takes us into that nosedive down. And so self-esteem gives us confidence, and low self-esteem doesn't, right? It takes us onto that low thing. So I was just thinking in the sense of our potential. We've put our potential as something, if we haven't reached it, we can't get there. Therefore, that makes us lacking on some level. And then how do you come to terms with that if you're lacking and it's so big and it's almost like we can't reach it? That can be a really hard place for anyone to be. And certainly when I started to look at myself and think, oh my God, I wanted to be a doctor. I'm still on that journey a little bit, but I wanted to be a doctor. I had based everything my whole life on being that. And so every time I realized I had missed my mark, I wasn't at the mark, I kept just feeling more worse and worse and worse. But I was chasing so many courses that I never took time to appreciate that I'd actually succeeded in many of them.
Yeah,
I succeeded very well.
Story. Yeah, and I also know your story and your mother's play in that and how she impacted and on that. When you were talking, it reminded me of, I always used to be someone that had their glass half empty. My glass was always half empty, and I could not for the life of me fill it up. I've only recently been able to fill it up. So I know that, I guess I really know the difference between having your glass half empty and always trying to fill it up to having it full and overflowing. It just when you were talking, it just reminded me of that.
Yeah. And then I suppose what's bringing up for me is when you say my glass was half empty, what did it feel like, right?
Struggle, hardship.
A struggle.
Hard.
And then you go, my glass is half empty. Where are you empty? In your body, where are you empty? When you're saying I'm now feeling it as full and overflowing, then what that means as a somatic sort of experience, right?
Yeah.
It's much nicer, right? We know where we are.
Different. It's really different.
Yeah.
One is very much a conscious. One feels like, because of the trauma, it feels like it's a conscious decision to try and, to have it full. Whereas people who are experiencing trauma, it's almost like they don't have a choice. It's half empty because they don't necessarily understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about trauma, I mean, trauma is such a big topic nowadays. And certainly I always used to remember how I used to always think from my first few days, I'd always say trauma is at the heart of everything. And it was really until I hadn't really followed that route, except that from a biological thing, I knew that your cholesterol was raised. I knew that, I was suffering from IBS. And when I was doing some deep breathing, I realized that I could slow that down and things would work. All of a sudden, my stomach would work instead of being so bloated and constipated. So I knew about this mind-body connection, but I really hadn't connected how traumatized I was. I was a therapist and I was doing what I thought was okay. And then I realized and I found out that I had imposter syndrome because I wasn't doing the things that I wanted. And when I tracked back, I realized that it was the cause of my infertility. It was the cause of my not succeeding. It was the cause of my difficulty with relationships. I couldn't talk about the things that I really wanted to talk about deeply to my partner because I had been taught that you don't tell people things, right? You keep things to yourself. That's weakness if you do that. And so part of that really was part of my avoidant behaviors that I learned in trauma. And my story is really my mother womb. And I suppose also the idea that a father that was there as an enabler for her to do what she wanted. So I think in families, this is what you have in family systems. You will get one that'll be the controller or the narcissist or whatever her needs are. And then you will have others that will enable the dynamic. of what goes on. And so I certainly think that if, you know, when a mum isn't in tune with her children, so if a mum is in tune, we activate something called mirror neurons in our brain. And for example, when I smile at you, you are more likely to smile at me back. You know, I'll smile nicely. You're more likely to smile back. And the smiling creates reciprocation, right? Now, as a baby, we learn very early on that we must smile. And we must actually please other in order to survive on some level. But if you have a mum that is very secure in herself and a mum that's able to be in tune with her baby, then there's a real natural flow of reciprocity, right? Mm-hmm. So you get sense of, so the mum gives them compassion, gives them love, attends to their needs. But that didn't happen, and so the baby grows up, they become more, they're not feeling constantly stressed in their body, right? They are more likely to be outgoing. They're more likely to bounce back when terrible things happen. They are more likely to be friendly, right? And so therefore, as life will be, if you're friendlier and you're happier, you're nicer, you encourage that in others. And this is the law of attraction, right? Yeah. Because the happier you are, the more you bring in because of mirror neurons, which are these special mirror neurons that we have in our brain. But if you are a sensitive child, and your first response is to go into the fright, kind of freeze kind of place, then what happens is your face changes, right? And then it becomes hard to be readable. And so you get a whole series of situations. So say if my mother was angry or a mother is insensitive to the cues of a baby, then they're not mirroring the baby and the baby is mirroring their negative state, which means that a baby then starts to grow up mirroring that negative state.
Wow.
They start to be hypercritical of themselves. They start to not feel good enough because, hey, guess what? I'm not, even when I smile, I'm not getting a response, right? So what happens? Have you ever seen how they train dolphins? Mm-hmm. The way they train dolphins is the dolphins will play. And then if they want to hone in a particular skill, what they do is they then give the dolphin a reward at a particular point when it's a skill they want to hone. So the dolphin slowly over time quickly learns because they're very smart. They've got two brains, big brains. And so what happens is after a little while, they kind of realize that and they get fed, and they trained. Then they want to give them a new one. They want to teach them a new series of skills. So what they do is they then don't feed them with that one and they find a new skill, right? And when the dolphin does the jump or the hoop or whatever automatically by itself, they feed that one. So that slowly after time, the dolphin will kind of realize, okay, I've got this one encoded, but this is different. So it then learns, so it does that one and that one. So the next, so it learns a sequence of two. And it carries on like that. But each time the dolphin does everything that it can to get the reward because it's trying to work out, right? Now think about this, how this is for humans. When you don't get the praise that you need, when you don't get the affirmation that you need, you go through hoops in order to find a way that this person will respond to you. Because from a very primitive experience, part of self-esteem is that we feel safe, but from a very primitive experience, we've got to feel safe, right? Yeah. We have to feel safe in order to survive. And our job is, nature doesn't necessarily think, hey, I've got to have them thrive. It says, I just need to get you to survive. I don't care what you do as long as you survive. And a child needs to survive, right? So it'll do whatever it is. So I learned to people please. I learned that my mother's needs were more important than me. So my mother is what I'd call a narcissist. She used to gaslight a lot, but she also physically beat me until I was about 12. My dad never touched me, but she was the controller. And so she gaslighted, she was competitive. We had to make her look good all of the time. So if we didn't, and she came back home, she would say, I'm ashamed of you. And we know shame. What is the fact of shame? What does shame do? It contracts us, right? The whole purpose of shame is for somebody to make you do what you need to do. The feeling has to be so bad that you feel threatened. You have to feel as though your life is going to die. And that's what shame does. It makes us, it taps into that dying feeling, so that because we can't stand it, we do something else, and we often conform in order to be accepted, to be loved, to be whatever. But that feeling of shame is just so awful. And this is why a lot of people really struggle with shame. Yeah, because they've encoded that they have to do in order to be able to be accepted in some level.
Yeah, shame's terrible. It's really awful. Can we just delve into imposter syndrome a little bit more? What is it? Because I've heard lots of different theories about imposter syndrome. How would you describe it? What is it?
Okay, so imposter syndrome is where we put a value system on what we do rather than what we are. So what, gosh, I can't remember the names of the two people that first coined imposter syndrome, but what they found was many professional women, although very high up in businesses, were not successful. They were still being held back by some fear, right? And when they really looked at that, some of them felt that they, even though they knew they were more than capable to do a job, they still didn't really believe they were good enough. So they didn't go for the jobs, right? They didn't congruently go. And we know from research that women need to be 100%, believe they're 100% ready for a job, whereas men, 40%.
They'll just go.
I know, they just go. They will learn on the job. And that's because of the way we've been conditioned as women. Doesn't help that biologically we have estrogen, and we are in the space where we are softer and gentler than men, so we feel pain very differently. But we are more likely, it all taps down to safety, right? If we want to feel safe that we're going there and we're doing the job, and we're not going to be ashamed, we're not going to be put into shameful positions. If you grow up knowing that you are on what you do, then there isn't a sense of safety for yourself when it gets taken away. But if you think about most men, they've always felt that they are enough, generally because of society. They're the favored group. So therefore, what happens is they can go for these things because they don't have that sense of base unsafety that has already been instilled, and often isn't the case in women. So imposter syndrome, you can have the sense of feeling as though you're an imposter, but many don't. Many of them don't. And actually, interesting, you can have high self-esteem because it's contextual. If you can know that I know I can climb mountains. I know that anything I can do with my hands, I can do, right? I know if I try and apply, I'll be able to do it. In other contexts, I have incredible low self-esteem. Because one is where you start looking at yourself and thinking where you have no control. And the other one is where you have control. And self-esteem is based on our perceived level of control. So if you feel that, like you said something earlier on, which is, I realized I could make a conscious decision to feel full. Right? You took an action to feel full. You made a conscious decision. You had agency. So often when we don't have a sense of control, where things are outside our awareness or controlling place, then we lack the sense of confidence. And if you don't have that sense of fullness inside you, it becomes very, very difficult to even trust what the evidence is sitting in front of you, because you can't feel it. You can't feel it. This is the problem.
How closely aligned is trauma and imposter syndrome?
incredibly aligned. Incredibly aligned. I mean, if you think about it, if you remember, we talked earlier on about a mother and mother neurons, and we talked about the idea that if a mother is in tune with you, you feel safe. Safety is a feeling. Safety is a feeling in our body. And when you don't feel safe, then you don't have that feeling that your body is full. So you don't really have a sense of your boundary, and you don't have a sense of control of your boundaries, right? And trauma, this is what happens with trauma, isn't it? You have a sense where an incident happens, and then your whole system gears up for events that go following after that. Now, if in the sense of imposter syndrome, like with my mum, basically my mum expected me to be a perfectionist, right? So imposter syndrome has sort of 5 categories: perfectionism, hyperachieving, so doing because you want to do all the time so that you can keep your pedestal up here, and then you worry if the pedestal falls. The inability the needing to be an expert in everything. I was called walking encyclopedia.
I can see that.
And I love that.
Yeah.
And then there's being a natural genius, which means that you don't take the novice part. You've got to be an expert straight away. So, which can be incredibly hard. Can imagine trying to get out the gate there. And then there's the superwoman. The superwoman is the person who does everything perfectly, right? So she's the one that holds all the balls and does everything and loves it because she thrives, because she's learned how to do these things. But different times in our life, things happen, and it just gets too heavy and things start crashing. So you learn these adaptive strategies through the trauma. So in my case, my mother pushed me because she must be seen to be the perfect mum. She needed to have perfect children, right? Because remember, I said she was going to be ashamed. So the imposter syndrome came in, is that I didn't learn that I was good enough for myself. In fact, I cannot remember one event ever where she actually praised me.
That's hard.
Even when I got first class grades, never any praise. So I grew up without that oxygen praise of being able to feel, oh, yeah, you're good, right? I love you. You didn't have to do that, but I'm really proud of you, right? Instead, it was, why didn't you do better? So there was never that. So part of the imposter syndrome is you learn these adaptive strategies. So we all have them. We all have them to various degrees. Some people have, we have perfect, they all suit us. They all help us. They're all strategies we learned in order to keep us safe, but they are saboteurs. They're sabotaging behaviors, and they are adapted directly from the trauma, fright, and flight mechanisms. And of course, we talked earlier on.
Now let's do this.
The sympathetic and parasympathetic and trauma and what happens and things
Where's
like
the brain?
Here's my brain. I wanted to bring my brain up today because I love my brain. It's a lovely brain. But I wanted to actually really talk a little bit about things because I think it's really important. Trauma happens where we literally freeze a moment in time with the original beliefs, the original physical feeling. Everything gets stuck almost in time, and it's almost like our body. I don't know if you understand a bit about adaptation, but our body, it becomes encapsulated. And what happens is over time, our body almost bypasses it and it forms a new pattern. So that original trauma never gets seen to. So for example, if you get hurt, you go, oh, ouch. Okay, you know where the hurt is, right? But after a period of time, we start to desensitize. And what happens is our body bypasses information so that these traumas you don't recognize them. So that's why we can actually have amnesia for trauma, right? Oh. Because we're not being triggered, but there's always, interestingly enough, there are always emotional triggers to that trauma under certain events. Yeah. And the problem is, because we now can't remember this trauma here, we're triggered without knowing why. And every time we experience trauma that's similar to that, and I think Chris Tuck talked about it as well, everyone's talked about it, but every time we experience a trauma that has a little similarity to that trigger, the body doesn't say, oh, well, I've got one for one. No, it goes on a general kind of response for a particular kind of feeling, right? So it codes this feeling, this is the trauma, I'm going to respond to this kind of feeling. So it almost becomes one big pot of feelings that are similar, but they will trigger you into doing something. So, for example, if we kind of see somebody look at us in a strange kind of way, or having a sense of authority, right? I have real problems with people in authority. Sometimes I really start to get a bit anxious, particularly if they look at me in a particular way that my mother used to look at me, and I realized that that's what it is. That glance, I didn't understand this was my mother trigger, right? Because that glance was a look. It was a look like this. It was so cold, so cold. It was like reptilian, right? And it was almost like you don't know how to predict it. And the moment I couldn't predict what I could do, I was in a place of no control. And that's what authority really used to do for me until I developed sort of more signals of actually, I'm okay. Yeah, this is about trauma and not about this. Okay, I can do something else here. I'm an adult now. But yeah, this is really interesting. So let's just quickly go into this and really talk about it a little bit. So I want you to, we've got the brain, we've got the left and the right side of the brain. And most people will know that the left side is very much more sequential, more about our thinking, planning, all of that. And that's mainly this part of the brain, the frontal part of the brain, more. And the way we process from the back to the front, by the way. So when it gets to the front, it's almost like we've got an idea, we've got a thought that's more congruent. So we have the brain, we have the frontal lobes, the parietal lobes, the occipital lobe, where our visual centers are, the cerebellum that sits underneath, and the temporal lobes. Now, this part that we see is the neocortex, the new cortex. It's the newest part of our brain. And if we have a look, and I said, oh, there's the spinal cord over here, the oldest part of our brain is here. So this is where the amygdala is, the pons varolii, those ones there, they're processing. The thing that's really important is to recognize that this is where the optic nerve is, by the way. The olfactory nerve is here. Do you see in line where it is? Yeah. It's not here on the top, but it's actually right underneath. So I'm going to show you this part of the brain. So the optic nerve, which is sitting over there, is literally in line with the emotional center. So this is our emotional brain. So we can call that our emotional self. And this area is our higher self.
Wow.
The whole of the top part, not. So this is our younger child, or our feeling self, or our emotional self. So we know that the amygdala, can't see the amygdala here, but the amygdala would be, if we cut this in half, more or less, and in the middle, so if you think of sort of half your brain down where your ear, sort of round your ear area, sort of inside, that's where the amygdala sits. And the amygdala, its job is to get these signals, right? So everything comes to the amygdala first. And you might have heard of something called the fast and dirty route, or the slow route. The Ledoux talked about these two things, which was how we react. When we react, we're going fast and dirty, right? Because we're not taking in our cognitive kind of sensations. So you have this situation, but what's really important is to think about, this is your emotional center. This is where your insula sits. Now, our insula is involved with our sense of safety. It's our sense of space. So the more we meditate, the more we do stuff to downregulate, our insula gets more grows bigger. It gets more, and then we have a sense of safety. So a lot of women, or a lot of people that have anorexia, this is why it works for anorexia and eating disorders, because they have a sense of not knowing where their body is. In a sense, their body's not full. The insula helps us feel full, gives us that sense of safety and tells us we are here. I'll talk about the two systems, and this system here is our cerebellum, and our cerebellum is our system for our proprioception. Our proprioception is on every muscle of our body, of our skeletal muscle, because it tells us where our limbs are in space and time. And so we have something here, which over here, there's a tiny little space, and that's where our pituitary gland, our pineal gland is. And our pineal gland is often what we call our God.
That's where it is.
It's tiny, but it sits
sort of tiny.
It sits sort of in there. And that tells us, it releases DMT. So it releases stuff that allows us to have this big sense of wonderment in life. Right? But it also connects us, and that's why we have to really somatize. There are more cells in here than there are in the whole of the brain, by the way.
Wow.
More neural connections, because it's got a big area. So you then have this corpus callosum over here, which is the bit that attaches the left and the right brain, right? Holds it together. And above that, you have the cingulate complex. So the anterior cingulate is the side, posterior the side. Now, we get a signal coming here, right? Comes in through our eyes, through our ears mainly, maybe sensory. There's the olfactory over here. So you have senses come in, they go straight to the amygdala. The amygdala, there's a huge big jump in the amygdala, and that's an orientating signal. It says, hey, what's going on, right? That is below conscious level. It's less than 0.2 nanoseconds. That's fast, right?
Very fast.
It's way out of our conscious level.
Yeah.
Consciousness, we're about at 5 nanoseconds. So if we have that, we can't get there, right? So we can't stop that signal. We can't stop that signal coming in because it's old, right? But what we can do is stop our response to the signal. That's what we can do. Now, in the fast and dirty, we don't give time for the brain to connect. But what happens is we have the center here, our emotional center, our emotional self. When this gets triggered, the brain says, I don't care about you right now. I need you to get the hell out of here. So what it does is this center over here, which is the one above this, the corpus callosum, it contracts it and makes it like a skull cap.
Wow.
So that's why we can't think, right?
Why?
The body is trying to not get us to think. It wants to get us the hell away.
Yeah.
And this is the first thing, the first part of the sympathetic system. We have two. We have the sympathetic, parasympathetic system. The sympathetic system is really about first, let's get away. And second, if we can't get away, we must fight. So that's really important. So if the signals aren't going through to our brain, it means that we can't think and we can't downregulate. So that's a real problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if we think of that, the cortex is our higher self, it means our higher self can't help our little self.
Yeah, there's a barrier between the two of them.
It's
Disconnect.
a physical barrier. It's a real barrier. It
Disconnect.
happens. It literally happens. It inhibits signals going up and down.
Wow.
So if it's doing that, because remember, it's all about safety. The body needs to stay safe. It's going to choose safety above anything. This is what happens. So we get out of the place wherever we are, and we find our place of safety, and then we learn. What did I do? Oh, I did that. I'll do it again and see if it works.
Is this how so much resistance gets created to try and figure things out?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you think about that, now each of these brains, you'll have heard that the left brain is more thinking, serializing, and the right brain is more that. The left amygdala is more negative, more prone for negative signals. And the right amygdala is prone, so withdrawal signals. And the right is more prone for approaching. So the right emotional self will say to itself, I want to play. I'm just going to go and play. I don't care what's happening. I'm just going to play. Well, that's not necessarily wise, but it's what it's doing, right? I'm going to go to the safety place and I'm going to play by myself. I'm going to do whatever I do by myself. The left side is saying, I need to get away from here. So the left side is very much about that fear-driven fright thing. The right side is more about the addiction to the reward. So we have these approach reward kinds of dynamics that happen, right? So trauma, in a sense, is an approach and a reward. We're seeking the reward of safety. We're seeking the reward of we'll say even praise, whatever it is that allows us to know we're safe, we seek it, right? So we will always seek the reward as the moment we've had that negative signal. So we learn that conditioning. We learn the conditioning. This means I've got to do this. And this means I've got to do this. This means I've got to do that, right? And these are so old because we learned them so young. We've forgotten that we did that.
Yeah.
So this is, and one of the things, and I think we talked about, so the adrenaline one is about getting us going, but we have another system called the parasympathetic system, and the parasympathetic system more recently over the last 20 years, they've started to notice that the parasympathetic has two systems. It has an approach system, and it also has a withdrawal freeze system. And the freeze system starts from the older part of the brain. And that system is really the system that's about going down. So it's from, have you ever seen a crocodile? Have you ever watched what they do?
I've seen that, but I don't know if I've really paid any attention.
They go down in the water, and they go down, 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 and then they pounce, right? Now, we all have this capability. We all have the capability of freezing. But we can't do it very well because we're mammals. So for us, it's dangerous to go into the freeze state. It becomes dangerous if we do it for too long. So this is it. But the parasympathetic, of which most of the signals come from our body to our brain, telling our brain, hey, listen to what's going on here. Listen to what's going on here. 80% of those neurons come from the body to the brain. Only 20% goes down, which is really interesting, I think. So it's really telling us what it's trying to do is tell us, listen to your body, get back into your body. Your body is where you're going to be safe.
But if there's that disconnect, then it's quite hard to get into the body because
yes,
it's completely disconnected.
Exactly. So if you're disconnecting, what are you doing? You're increasing adrenaline. Adrenaline's job is to keep you out of the body. It's to keep you having a look, looking out, going and running, right? That's its job. So its job is to not make you feel, and also adrenaline actually is a painkiller, right? So by doing that, it disconnects you because you're now not feeling your body. So if you've been stressed in trauma, you're going to have loads and loads and loads of adrenaline going. A lot of the time, if you keep getting triggered, like for a mother wound, right? When you're little, you keep getting triggered, you keep getting triggered. You've now got this wound that's happening. And in your case, you would have been, your caretakers, you were not safe, right? So you kept getting triggered. But because you were never truly safe, cortisol also built up.
Yeah.
And cortisol makes us more psychotic, essentially. It makes us perceive the world in a not so helpful way.
Oh, it's awful stuff.
Yeah, so that's when we talk about our saboteurs that that negative self-judgment, that negative judgment of others, the helplessness about the world. These things are all come from that aspect of trauma. So it makes it really difficult to undo trauma without going into the body, right? So when we talked about it, the disconnect was taking you out. You learned that it was safe because you didn't feel your body. I think you said I was like a head without a body.
Yeah, I still don't feel my body. I'm still very much in my head.
Right. And that's because that's because you have there's still adrenaline going on and some of those centers, and you haven't grown those neurons.
Wow.
So for example, certainly when we're smaller and younger, we build these connections from our head to our body, right? Now they are already there, but when trauma happens, if you don't use those neural pathways well, what happens is then you can't connect to them, right? Because you don't sprout neurons to build and connect it. What you use grows. What you don't use kind of doesn't disappear completely, but it gets smaller.
Yeah.
So it does require a lot of submersion into your body, literally, really having things that actually give you a submersive effect so that you can feel things on your body. That's probably going to be your biggest way to get to your body, seriously, is to have massages are often very, very good for that.
Yeah, I love massages.
Yeah, so that and when you're in the massage, to really just focus on the feeling. So instead of just thinking, oh, this is nice, but actually just be in the feeling and go, oh, okay, so they're touching. What are they touching? Where are they touching? Oh, how does that feel? Really spend time in your massage.
I normally fall asleep.
I know, but you're switching off, right? You're not using the massage as a meditation.
Right.
So even for a short while, it'll be a really good experiment for you.
Yeah, I'm going to
do that. Because what we want to do is give your body a language to talk to you.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you haven't had parents that can say, oh, honey, that's disappointment. Oh, that's not really anger. That's disappointment.
Yeah.
Or, or helping you find words for those feelings. You don't get to associate things with the feeling, right? So you don't know, because you've just got this ball of whatever.
Yeah.
And so even when you do go into your body, sometimes you might feel very uncomfortable because it's something you're not used to.
Yeah.
And it's easier to flip out and go to sleep than it is to stay in your body.
Yeah, it's funny, falling asleep, I always thought that was the therapeutic thing, but it's obviously not. I've obviously got that bit wrong.
No, it's not wrong. It's not wrong, because of course you need a release, right? But what is it going to serve at the long run? So what there may be that for a short period of time in the massage, you really focus, right? And then consciously say, okay, I let go now. Consciously give yourself the permission in a different way from what you've done before, because then you're slowly building up those neural connections because remember we talked about proprioception. We talked about this part of the brain, this part is our connector. This is our God part, right? This is the part that tells us where we are in space and time.
Right.
And it gives us the ability to be able to really know where we are. So in a way, when we go to sleep at night, we let go of control. And often we let go because we're exhausted, right? So we don't spend time just going through our body and saying, oh, what a lovely body you are. Oh, let me feel. Oh, I can feel the roots of my hair. Wow. Okay. We don't spend time getting to develop that relationship with our body, that we actually allow ourselves to feel it. And I know for me that was true too, right?
Yeah.
My IBS was the only way I actually would go back into my body and say, okay, I need to breathe and feel, because I didn't want to feel pain, right? So I would do everything to not feel the pain in my body. So going into my body was hard to start off with, and it's still quite a challenge. And and also because we come in, we get such a sensory overload the moment you start focusing in your body. It's almost like the conscious mind finds it very hard anyway to observe, because we only have 7 + 2 bits of information that we can assume, because our conscious mind, our mind in awareness, let's say, our conscious mind can only have, it's very energy use. It uses a lot of energy, right? Our unconscious mind doesn't use any energy. Because guess what? It's a habit.
Right. That's interesting.
So it takes energy to break it.
Yeah.
Right? Until it becomes easy, right?
Yeah. Chris has asked some questions online. Chris, sorry, I've just seen the questions. So Chris says, adrenaline and cortisol, are you able to make their roles clearer, please? So the difference between cortisol and adrenaline.
Yeah. Okay. So adrenaline is it's a neurotransmitter, but adrenaline is also released from our adrenal glands that sit above our kidneys. They're in the adrenal, the middle part of the adrenaline. Adrenaline is part of the fight system of the sympathetic system, and adrenaline's job is to get us going, right? That's its job. So it will open up all the blood vessels that go to those areas of the body that are about moving fast. So it's interesting because adrenaline, other than the fact that it's with our kidneys, adrenaline is our sympathetic system, which is run by adrenaline, really comes from this area of our thoracic. So our lower thoracic, below our seventh cranial nerve, seventh vertebra. So therefore, it's going up and it's going to the body. So its primary function is getting us to move. So it'll do things like make our eyes dilate. It will help, it'll dry our mouth so we can just run. It'll slow down our system in our stomach. So everything that's to do with rest and digest and sleep, our adrenaline is absolutely the opposite of that. So our digestion slows down. Our heart rate will beat faster because the adrenaline has the ability, it wants us to get moving. So it'll go to the muscles. It'll allow the muscles to move faster, and it'll make our heart beat faster so that the blood can go around and give more oxygen and more food to those areas. So that's what adrenaline's job mainly does. And adrenaline, once you slow down, adrenaline drops quite quickly. So it's quick to rise and it's quick to drop, right? So adrenaline more or less. So we have adrenalines in the ends of our nerves, in the nerves, and we have adrenaline. So if we have it there, it means it's very, very quick. It doesn't need the adrenaline from the adrenal glands. What happens with cortisol is kind of like something that comes in a little bit later. Remember, we can still have stress, but if adrenaline can't keep being maintained, so what happens is cortisol comes in to support, and cortisol is acts more like a hormone. Although adrenaline is a hormone, but we tend to think of it more as a neuroreceptor rather than a hormone as such. Cortisol acts more like a hormone. It's slower. It's released from an organ, and it tends to raise our blood sugar. So it doesn't really have any direct effect on our nervous, on our peripheral, our blood vessels and things like that. But what it does is it increases sugar, and it allows our body to have more stores of sugar so that we can do more, right? So it's becomes a supportive system. But in its extreme, part of its extreme is that if we use it too much, it also does a cementing. So it will cause those ways of thinking to be a little more pronounced. So anyone who has something like Cushing syndrome is where we have a lot of cortisone. What happens is they're very big, but they swell up. They look really bizarre because of the way they present, but also they often are very psychotic. And really, when I say psychotic, it's more like neurotic. They are anxious, highly anxious. So the cortisol makes our anxiety level raise.
It's horrendous.
It's horrendous. Now, most of us, cortisol levels will rise up and down during the day, right? But it's when cortisol stays in a very high level that it starts to become a problem. Mm-hmm. So you have high levels of cortisone that are doing what the cortisone is doing, or cortisol is doing, but then you've got adrenaline keep being triggered, right? So you get this. So what happens is now adrenaline's job is part of its job is that it actually helps neuroplasticity to go in that same direction. So if you're getting more anxious and you need to be in that constant flight state, what will happen is you'll start to home in those signals for that. So you'll strengthen those connections for that neural pathway, and also pathways within our body, right? So we tell ourselves all sorts of different things. Does that answer, Chris, for you? I mean, it's a huge subject. It's really hard to kind of give an explanation for both of those without going into too much detail.
Chris says when she had EMDR, had a massive physical impact response, which was very scary, but was a true reconnecting to the mind and body.
Wow. Yes. So yeah, I mean, EMDR. Thank you. That EMDR is a wonderful treatment. I love EMDR because EMDR moves across. Depending what it is, we're looking for a cross pattern. So you want something to go across from left side to
remind me what EMDR is. EMDR.
Eye movement.
Okay. Yeah.
Eye movement reprocessing, desensitization. Yeah. EMDR. Yeah. Eye movement. Yeah. So basically what you're wanting to do in EMDR, and really what you're getting people to do, is look left and right like this. And you can do EMDR at home, but it would be you need to have a therapist first, because it can trigger you, right? It can trigger you. So part of EMDR is that when you're bringing stuff across from one area of the brain to the other, part of EMDR, the first thing you do is you try and get people to relax. So you get them into the relaxed state, so now you can get information to go across. But what's also happening while information is going across is information's being fed down. And so what happens is the body starts to get a total symmetry of information coming in, like in an alignment. So yes, you might get to the trauma, which is in EMDR, you would have a safe space. You would help people you would say, okay, remember your safe space, come back into it, because what you want to do is process the trauma. You want to process the emotion that's attached to the trauma. Remember, we talked about trauma being an emotional self.
Yeah.
We have to deal with the emotion. It's a charge. Emotion is a charge, essentially. And so when we're all charged up, we need to change the charge. And what happens in EMDR is that by reprocessing, by bringing information across from one place to the other, just keep bringing it across, it has our eyes. There is a sense that I find when I do EMDR with people is that they start to really get very, very sleepy, incredibly sleepy. And one could be that they don't want to be aware of this, but they start to yawn straight away, very, very quickly. And one is when we're stressed and when we're traumatized, often we don't move our eyes. We're often very fixed in the way we look at things. And what happens is when you start moving them, they normally complain about their eyes because it's really painful. And it's because they don't use them. They don't move them enough. And what often happens is once they start moving, it's quite exhausting and they get really tired. And because they're in a safe space, they let go and they connect deeply with their body. And I certainly know for me, for EMDR, it's a wonderful way of allowing myself to get to those emotions from a safe space, because that's, we have to be safe before we do an EMDR. And one of the things of EMDR is we look at the core belief. What is the belief that is not true, but that you're still carrying?
Yeah.
And I think Chris does something. She does another TRTP. I think I think that's a therapy that she does. There's this core belief we have to always look at and we have to undo. And in EMDR, this is where you've got to find this core belief that everything is almost based on. And if you can get to that, what happens is all the blocks kind of just dissolve, and you're able to, what happens is they heal without even knowing how they've healed.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
you just,
Resolved.
you don't even need to always process stuff, because your body knows how to, because of the charge, it knows how to decharge, right?
Yeah.
And by going into that really nice safe space in the EMDR, while you're in control, what happens is that you have a very strong anchor for safety and a very negative anchor, and you're actually bringing them together. And by bringing them together, if the safety anchor is really strong, what will happen is your brain will go, oh, I'm actually okay. This is happening, but I'm okay. So it doesn't update. It doesn't in the brain, and it updates that emotional child, right?
Yeah. Wow.
So the emotional child, or our emotional center, goes, okay, and it might do this for a little, and then it goes, oh, okay. And then what happens, remember we talked about the anterior cingulate? That relaxes. Information comes in.
Oh, wow.
And so the brain starts to talk to that younger self in a different way. Now, we don't always know. In EMDR, we'd normally just say, follow the trend, follow whatever's coming up. And then you would, as a therapist, you would go, okay, so how are you feeling now? How's that feeling now? Has that picture changed? So everything is done with looking at pictures, and everything is done with feelings and following the therapy of the feeling. There's not very much analyzing going on.
Yeah, Chris said that she couldn't do the eyes, but she did the sound.
Sound is fantastic. Sound is fantastic also because the sound, there is the parasympathetic has a loop to the ears. And when we talk and have sound, it relaxes us. So like when someone like a mother talks very nicely and gently to a child, right? There's this really soft gentleness timbre and it makes you relax. Yeah. So this is a little bit like what happens when you have the sound. The sound can often really bring you into yourself and you feel safe. Yeah.
Which is so important. It's so important, feeling safe. We don't talk about it enough, I don't think. I just don't think we realize how unsafe we actually feel, maybe sometimes.
Everything is about safety. Our whole existence is about safety. That comes first. We cannot have enlightenment. We cannot be our essential self unless we're safe.
Yeah.
So when I think that this is what everyone's job in this whole wide world is, to learn to be their essence self. So to know that they're fully, fully safe no matter what. When we know we're fully, fully safe, then we can let go of the trauma, right? The brain is able to reset itself. Our genes, those that have been active for trauma, they decrease. And actually all the other genes start to turn on that allow you to build more and more in areas that are much more resourceful and helpful for you.
It's such a big subject, isn't it? It's so complicated. It is actually, when you start to get under the surface of it, it's really complicated.
Yeah, and I think what's really important is to understand that, we come into this world and we come with the expectation that we're just going to be surviving and we're going to be happy, right? But then we come into an environment that we experience our first pain when we disconnect from our mum. So while for 9 months, we're cocooned. We're in the God state, basically. We're totally cocooned. Actually, you don't really, your body has got so used to being in the amniotic fluid that you don't feel it anymore. This is really interesting. And when you come out, the shock is really big because you're feeling for the first time your skin experiencing. Your skin is for the first time really experiencing this separation. And so this is where we have our first wounding or our first disconnecting. And then depending on what comes after that will influence how we respond in the world. So I think it's really important, one, to make sure that we do our best to keep ourselves safe. Now, you talked about some things that would be useful. I mean, if you're feeling very unsafe, put a blanket around you. Put a duvet around you. Let yourself rock. Just let yourself rock, and you'll find that after a short while, you will relax. Because our first thing is about safety. When we put ourselves in something, we start to feel safe, and it takes us straight back to that womb experience. And the body says, oh, I know this, right? It's you covering yourself, right? So it's you covering, you're in control of that. So it's telling you you're in control. Secondly, the rocking takes us into a rhythm. And the rhythm takes us into the rhythm of our heart. And remember, our heart is such a very strong magnet for things. Our heart has got, with the pounding of our heart, we have this beat. And this connects us back to our heart, and it connects us back to the rhythm of our heart. And it puts our whole body into a nice, relaxed place. And then a really good thing is to just be in that body and feel your body and ask your body. And I know Chris talked about asking your body what it wants.
Sorry, Crystal.
Yeah, and then asking your body what it wants and what it needs, and acknowledging it. Really acknowledge your body. I know you're frightened. I know you're scared. What is it? Tell me. I can see that. I can see why that's happening, right? I can understand that. So you bring your higher self into the play. So you're activating this part of your brain, and you're comforting the younger part of your brain. You downregulate it. And then your brain, then everything starts to work much, much better. So I always remember saying, if you don't pay attention, you pay with pain. If you don't pay, and pain is only you not paying attention. So everything we experience in life is because we're not paying attention.
Oh, interesting.
So if we pay attention to what it is and we engage with it, we move towards it, what will happen is the pain will start to dissipate. So if you start to move towards a feeling, because the most thing is you've been conditioned to move away from it.
Yeah.
If you're moving towards it, inside is heaven. Inside, the moment you start to dissolve that boundary around that, or the energy around that, then the energy is free to move around the body. And then you can feel your body. You feel your body filling up.
Sherine, I'm lucky I have access to a massage. It's cheap here.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky. I'm going to do what you said last time and see how long I can stay awake.
Well, try not to go too much into your head, but
yeah,
I mean, it's a balance, because there's analyzing, isn't it? And we like to analyze anyway. But I think what's really important is to do something which is really, when you're thinking about it, is to actually you basically are okay. I'm being massaged. Just feel the hands. Imagine go more into the imagination of, okay, I can feel her hands there. How deep is she going? Right? Can I measure that? Right? How does it feel when I start to relax? Does she go deeper? So you start to just really become curious.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not a case of analyzing, but it's becoming really curious and really excited. And then you go, oh, okay, so that's, and then see if you can see an image and go, oh, okay, so if my skin were that thick and she's there, okay, so all right. So you start to get a map,
right,
of yourself. And what will happen inadvertently after a while is your whole body will start, because this is the mirror neurons. What happens in one area often happens in the other. Right? So because our body talks to itself, talks across, it does cross talking. So invariably, when I used to do massage, we used to do the loose side first, so that the tight side could relax first before we went to the tight side to the loose, because this is how the body does. So it will relax and loosen because this is all guarded, right? So sometimes you have to work out adjacent to it rather than directly on it. So this is a way to work adjacent to a problem.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
So if you kind of do that, then what will happen is indirectly the rest of your body will start communicating, and you'll start going, oh, okay, I'm starting to feel my feet tingle. I'm starting to feel my hands tingle, and that'll excite you more, right? Because this is a different tingle. We know we can code excitement in tingles, but it could also be fear, because depending on what's going on. So, but it's how we're coding it, right? And you can get excited tingles.
Excited tingles. I like the sound of excited tingles.
Yeah, give it a go. Give it a go.
I'm going to give it a go. Sunday, I'm giving it a go. I'll let you know how it goes.
I'd love to know.
What was I going to say? I was going to say, what's something that people can do at home?
So, I mean, I think one of the easiest and quickest ways, I mean, I've given you an example of putting something around you and rocking, very primitive kind of things, but it activates that. But another thing of how do we bring our thoughts down is to actually learn how to properly name our feelings. So I always do something called mad, scared, sad, glad. So these are the primitive, in most emotions, most feelings, we will have a gamut of emotions. But if we identify what it is, what it means is we've got a handle on it. And that tells our body we're in control. Strangely enough, it tells us we're in control because now we know what the emotion is. So if we start and you say, I'm really mad about this. I'm so angry, I could spit. Right? And you really have a go and I'm angry because of this. I'm angry because of that. I'm angry because of this. Get rid of the charge. Get rid of the charge. Right?
Yeah.
Anger is energy coming up. It's charged, right? So you have it. I'm angry about this. You don't have to say this at this person, but it's worth doing in private, right? I'm angry at this. And then what are you scared about? What are you scared about? I'm scared that if I say anything, this is going to happen, right? If I'm scared that if I say this, I'm going to lose favor. This person's going to run away from me. If I say something, my marriage will break up. If I don't drink with my partner, then he's going to, all of these things. There's little lies that we tell ourselves, but we need to know what we're scared about. Why aren't we taking action? What are we sad about? And we have to get to sadness before we can go to gladness. We cannot have gratitude without going through this process properly. So we really need, when I say gratitude, I mean real gratitude that is heartfelt. We cannot have gratitude while we've still got this sad, mad, scared in play. So you need to get to the sadness, because our whole body is screaming we don't want to be sad, right? Because if we're sad, that means this. It means that I'm not good enough. It means that I failed. It means that, I'm too much. It means that it's hopeless. It's helpless. That's what the sadness actually is, how we're coding for it. So once we do that, we can then go, okay, thank you for telling me that. Because by then you'll have released the charge. You'll have regulated down, because each time you do it, what you'll find is that you'll get calmer and calmer and calmer and calmer. And then you will find that automatically you spring into gratitude. Strangely enough, you spring into gratitude, empathy starts to come.
Nice.
And so not just empathy for yourself, but actually empathy for another starts to kick in. And you start to see how you contributed maybe to some part of this deal, right? Now, you didn't intend it, right? But this is part of your pattern, right? So you then can go, oh, okay, so what can I do now? What can I do now? Now you're in action, right? Now you can move forward, because now this has been done. And your neurology does an update. Your neurology immediately does an update, because the moment you do something completely different from before, we have areas in our brain, it's called the N400 or the N4s. They wake up, they go, whoa, what's happening? Whoa, what's happening? And the brain goes, this is different. And then dopamine kicks in. It says, this is new. This is exciting, right? And so it wants more. So this is it. So that's why it becomes easier. So yeah, this is so if that's it, that's the exercise that I give every one of my clients, everyone. Of course, there's other ones of state management, licking your thumb and just blowing is a very good one to get them to.
I think I like the first one. Oh, actually, I like the massage the best.
Well, you've got a whole lot that you can try.
Yeah.
And I think for everybody, try things first. Yeah. Try. There's so many things that we can do. But what's really important is how does it do it for you?
Yeah.
Because not everybody's going to have they haven't had the same experiences. And so they won't have necessarily the same way of which they'll downregulate their adrenaline and noradrenaline. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really important to do that. And your body, your head lives on top of your body. It's the master processor, but it is part of your body. It is part of your body. It's not separate. It's just got constricted here.
Yeah, for sure. Sherine, how can people find you and get hold of you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, which is just Sherine Lovegrove, LinkedIn Sherine Lovegrove, Facebook, Sherine Lovegrove is there. I also do work with pregnancy, so I'm the conscious pregnancy coach, so you can find me there on Instagram as well. And on my website, SherineLovegrove.com. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. I think people that have been listening, Chris has left lots of comments.
Thank you, Chris.
It's been really helpful going into, having a look at the brain and seeing how it all connects together, and actually looking at trauma from a much deeper perspective, I think has been really helpful.
Yeah, I thank you. Thank you for having me. But I think it's so important that we understand, certainly for women, how trauma really impacts us, particularly because of that freeze, that pounce. Remember, I talked about the parasympathetic feeds the lower part of our body. This part is which affects women the most, right? So infertility, bowel problems, and problems with their stomach. So anything like that, and women, women have this because we have more estrogen receptors, so we have greater connectivity there. So when we understand that, then we know that we've got to make these areas particularly safe. Yeah, particularly safe. And that's why, in your case, I heard you saying that you didn't want people to touch you.
Yeah, still the same.
Like
still like it.
So there's this guarding, isn't it? There's guarding that's there.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's the guarding. And so it's really useful to kind of understand this is what, for women, this is our key pain are these three chakras, these three levels that we suffer from. Men suffer often from heart and higher ones, but women suffer from the lower. More compactive injuries that way. Yeah,
I've learned a lot during this summit. I think I've probably learned more during this summit than I have any of the others, which is interesting. My brain must be a bit more open to receive.
Well, I think we're coming. I mean, when you did the first summit, we've already got new stuff coming out, haven't we? So, I mean, it's becoming so huge the way things are. It's such a big, everything is connected. My first mystical experience was everything is connected. And we're starting to realize just how connected we are and how connected we are to each other, how much we influence each other.
Oh, yeah, big time.
And I think that is the wonderment of neuroscience, but the wonderment of humanity.
So someone's just left a message, and I'll finish with this one. Life Change Plans, this person's called. I've been listening. It has been interesting. Thank you. Trauma is very complex and healing is very difficult. It's a journey, that's for sure.
It is a journey. I didn't mention something which was also about why we have protracted grief and things like that, which is part of this anyway. But I think healing is a journey, but it doesn't have to be difficult. And I think that's important because once we get to that core belief, healing happens almost by itself. And we have to let go of that core belief. So we have to find a new belief that suits us better, the real truth, not the old truth.
The old
that isn't.
thing that's 50 years old, that has no place now, but it's still dominating your life. Yes.
It's because it's been automatic, right?
Yeah,
it's been
of course. Yeah.
so long. And we've got these triggers. We have to undo all those triggers almost.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
And I will see you tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay then.
Okay.